This is a disclaimer. The views, information, or opinions expressed in the Chai and Chill podcast series are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent accurate information. The primary purpose of this podcast is to educate and inform. This podcast series does not constitute medical or other professional advice or services. You may not cut, edit, or redistribute this podcast without the express approval of the Chai and Chill podcast team. The developers of the Chai and Chill podcast assume no liability for any activities in connection with this podcast or for use of this podcast in connection with any other website, computer, or device. Thank you. And if you like our content, please make sure to like this video and subscribe.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Chai and Chill podcast. I'm your host, Danial. Before we begin, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the Chai and Chill podcast. Also, comment down below what topics you'd like to see and what you'd like to cover in the future of the podcast. So I will start introducing myself. I'm Danial, obviously the host of this podcast. I go to Siena College. I study biology. I'm a pre-med major. The exam score I got was 1250.
Hi, my name is Mustafa. I'm also a sophomore at Siena College. I am also a biology major, pre-med. I took the ACT and I got a 35.
Guess that means I'm next. My name is Stefan. I am also a sophomore biology major at Siena College. What a surprise. And I took the SAT, and I don't remember the exact score I got, but it was somewhere in either 1400 or 1450. I'm pretty sure.
So hi, my name is Waleed Saeed. I attend the University of Connecticut. I study biology as well, and I got a 1410 on the SAT.
So guys, I think it's nice to know you guys. Nice to let the viewers know you guys. So SAT, ACT, they're both very important exams in my opinion. But let's go through like details of why it's important, and why do you guys think the exam's important?
Yeah, it's very obvious that like colleges use the exam as like a very important benchmark to figure out who they choose to admit, and different majors have different kind of like criteria or cutoffs, or like if you're in a biology major, then a lot of other applicants that you're applying with to college obviously will have a lot more of a competitive and a higher score compared to maybe some other non-impacted majors. So it's definitely a very important exam for college admissions. And I don't necessarily know if this would apply to a lot of other people, but if you go into like combined programs, it's also a very good benchmark to see how you would do on the MCAT. Because if you are planning on pursuing a career where there's a lot of standardized testing in your life, then the SAT and the ACT is kind of like a very good first initial feels of how you do on standardized tests. So there's a lot of different reasons why I think it's personally important.
A lot of schools find this test pretty important. I heard that with COVID and everything, that some schools became test optional, but in non-COVID circumstances, the SAT is, a very important scale when it comes to your college application, especially in some schools that are SAT and ACT heavy, meaning that, your score matters more than, for example, your resume and other things. Like everyone was saying, it's also important for many careers that people pursue, especially careers like medicine and like engineering, things like that, because it's like kind of the first standardized test you're going to take. If the proficiency that you have on this test determines how good you are at standardized tests and how good you can do in the future. Yeah, and I 100% agree. Everyone has made good points about that. It's at the end of the day, it's not going to go anywhere. I highly doubt that. People are still going to need to take it, even though it's test optional. I do recommend taking the exam, giving it a try, at least a decent amount of attempts, because that will help you get some leverage on, how you study for college, how exams are going to be like, and especially those pre-assurance programs that you're interested in. Those pre-assurance programs aren't not even only for medicine. There are pre-assurance programs for other things as well, and they all require an SAT score if you want to get early acceptance into those programs. So yeah, I would definitely recommend, taking the SAT, ACT. That's like the importance. So the next question is, if someone's starting to study for the SAT/ACT from today or tomorrow, what would be the first step the person should do? And after that first step that you bring up, what's the next? What do they do after that first step?
So personally, I think the baseline for even trying to attempt the SAT is you need at least some level of experience in the PSAT. You need to have taken the PSAT at least once or twice, because honestly, and I say this from personal experience, the only thing that majorly prepared me for the SAT was the PSAT. once you get a feel of like these college style, like College Board AP type questions, I have no doubt that you're going to find much more success than anybody who has not been introduced to these types of questions before, because they're almost formulaic in a sense. They try to trick you in some instances. They try to mislead you, misguide you, and it's really up to you to find out like what the correct answer is in some cases in the fastest way possible, right? I think that's what the most important part of these tests are, especially in stuff like the math section and things like that. Without knowledge of like being able to solve a certain type of question in the way they want you to, you're not going to find much success in doing the SAT in a timely manner. The second step I'd say is probably just practicing on your own outside of the PSAT, finding resources either online or finding a book or something, and just trying to do SAT problems to just more get a feel of what they want from you, what they're asking, and things like that.
I definitely think those are all good points. And for the ACT, what I did, because I don't think there's like a pre-SAT that you can take, or like pre-ACT equivalent that you could take, I would recommend that you just like print out a practice exam and just take it. Like full exam simulations, have a timer. If you don't finish, you don't finish, and just get a feel for how you did on a practice exam. Like just totally like cold feet go into it. And then from there, see what you need to work on. You know, maybe you're good at one section, then another. Maybe you need to work on one concept. Maybe you totally nailed this part and you don't have to worry about it. So because that's what I did, I took a practice exam, and then I kind of really honed in a lot of my like future revisions and future review onto the things that I needed to work on. Like I was really bad at reading in the grammar section, so I did a lot of grammar practice. So I would really recommend that you take like a practice exam and completely simulate the conditions if you were taking it. So that would be my first thing. And then you can probably tailor your future planning and future revision after that practice exam to see what exactly you need to work on.
So my recommendation for any standardized test is honestly, like everyone was saying, just to take a practice exam. Once you take this practice exam, I believe you can find them on Khan Academy. I'm not sure where you can find them for the ACT, but they're definitely online. Make sure you print out the test, because when you go in on test day, the test is going to be a piece of paper. It's not going to be on a computer. Try to mimic what's going to happen on test day as much as possible. Then once you print out the test, take the exam, and make sure you're timing it properly. If you don't, like as Mustafa said, if you don't finish, just don't finish that section in that time. Then be honest with yourself. For example, if you didn't know how to do a certain problem, but you guessed and you got it right somehow, make sure you're honest with yourself and say that I really don't know this problem. And then you would include that problem in the questions that you're going to review later. So my recommendation is take the practice test. Then after the practice test, go through every question, even the ones you got right. Make sure that the ones that you got right, you actually have those concepts down. And then the questions you got wrong and other included questions, I'd recommend reviewing multiple problems that are similar to that. You could definitely find worksheets online, Khan Academy practice, and then you could also use YouTube videos to learn the concept if you're struggling.
100% I agree with everyone that said on the second step. Also on the first step, I do agree with Stefan that taking that PSAT is useful for that one reason of that stress factor that you get and the people around you. Because if you take the test at home, obviously it does help, but you don't simulate the actual exam to the T without taking the PSAT. So I would recommend taking the PSAT, even if you're taking the ACT, because you still simulate that exam environment. Just once, you really don't even need to take it seriously. I mean, you can, but you know, that PSAT is going to help you judge what the exam is going to be like and simulate the environment around you.
Like even going off that point, I would recommend taking your first time taking the PSAT blind, completely blind, no supplements, nothing like that, no studying, just to get a feel of what type of questions they're going to ask, because that I feel like is the most important part to any either AP or college board or college type exam, because the point of these tests is that they want something from you to display, to judge your aptitude in certain kinds of fields. So going in blind, I feel, would really help you like further down the line, more than just trying to study for a PSAT, for example.
Yeah. So moving on to our next point, the resources that you used, did you use tutoring? That's, part of the question. And if you didn't use tutoring and you just taught yourself online or something like that, what resources did you use if you taught yourself online? I can start myself. Specifically, I did tutoring and I did online. I did tutoring in the beginning because I wanted just to relearn everything and just find out what I didn't know, and I wanted someone to teach me in person. So I specifically went to tutoring where they just taught me in person, but I didn't know that what was wrong. After the tutoring, I ended the tutoring 3 months later, and then I just started to teach myself by doing practice exams. So I did a hybrid of both. So that's what I personally did. When I would study by myself, I would use online exams and YouTube videos and stuff like that.
Yeah, I also did a similar thing. I used tutoring all throughout my time when I did standardized exams. And I also did a lot of things on the side. So I used a lot of online exams, a lot of practice exams, a lot of drill questions. I would buy a lot of prep books. But I know that sometimes tutoring can get expensive and people don't necessarily have the money for it. What I would recommend is that I would definitely recommend you take a practice exam online that you can find them, and do the exam and then see if you can find practice questions. A lot of practice books are also very good because they also have more practice exams in them. And then after you practice for a few months and you take the real exam and you get your score, if you're satisfied with your score, then you can move on. But if you want to improve your score, then I would recommend maybe you can start using tutoring. In my personal experience, I took the ACT 3 times, and I did tutoring throughout the entire times I took them, all 3 times. And I would say probably about after the second time I took it, the tutoring wasn't really that helpful. So tutoring is helpful in the sense that if you want some personalized attention and you can afford it, then I would definitely recommend it. But again, I wouldn't say that tutoring is very necessary if you're not going for a super competitive score or you're going into a very impacted major. Then I don't necessarily know if tutoring is worth it, because a lot of things that tutors teach you, you can kind of just train yourself to do from doing a lot of practice and repetition, and a lot of the books that you can buy and a lot of the things that you can get online. I know that some schools also might offer books. I don't know if that's necessarily a case for every single school, but it might also be worth asking around if that's a concern on your mind too, that, maybe some teachers or somebody at your school knows a place where you can get the books.
Yeah, and to kind of add on to what Mustafa was saying, you need to understand that tutoring gets rid of some of the discipline that you need to teach yourself. Teaching yourself takes a lot of discipline. And per se, for me, I didn't have that at the time of high school. I had it somewhat, but it wasn't fully there. So I obviously needed a push from other people to help make me study regularly and stuff like that. If you can study on your own and you can teach yourself, then don't do tutoring, because then you can save money and teach yourself. So you need to understand that if you cannot give yourself enough discipline to study, then consider taking tutoring. But if you have enough discipline, then just use Khan Academy and other YouTube sources.
Right, and I'd agree with both of you there that tutoring definitely provides some of that guidance that one may need to take these exams. I personally didn't use a tutor. The only thing I used to study for the SAT was I had this one book, and it was full of just practice problems, exams, things like that. I also used the College Board website to take some practice exams and do a lot of practice questions. And I would agree that tutoring is more, like Mustafa said, that if you want to get a really high score, a very competitive score, I'm talking upwards of almost max, then yes, tutoring would definitely be very helpful for you if you're going for that score. But if you're more just going for that moderately decently high score, you can definitely get there just by your own self, just using the tools that you have available to you. And I myself, I bought that practice book, and I didn't really regret it. It wasn't that expensive, but I could imagine that, you know, if you're decently disciplined yourself and you get a tutor that's basically regurgitating the things that you could have taught yourself, I'd agree that that is definitely a waste of money. I can see why there's a lot of controversy surrounding the SATs, because people who have tutors for them definitely 100% by and large do much better than people who don't. So I can see why there is a wealth disparity in SAT test scores.
Yeah, and that's why I kind of brought up the idea that like tutors can be expensive, because you know the reality is not everybody can afford them, and that's totally fine, because even if you're going for a very competitive score, you don't necessarily need the tutor if you have a lot of discipline and if you're willing to put in the work. Because for at least the ACT, the way it is that in order to get the higher scores, you have to miss less questions, obviously. But I think the difference between like a 35 and a 36 is literally like one question. Like you literally have to get like 100% on the exam to get a 36. So you can definitely do a lot of practice exams in like books that you can buy, which are much cheaper than tutoring. And if you span out your studying over a long period of time, like a few months, and if you make like a schedule and if you stick with it, and if you have that discipline that everybody's been talking about, then you can absolutely get even like a very high competitive score. But tutoring is like, if you want to, and if you have the money and if you can afford it, then I would definitely recommend it if you're going for that very high competitive score.
Yeah, and it's
I'm
just a
going.
matter of necessarily,
Go ahead,
do you,
Stefan.
I'm sorry, yeah, do you take the time and the effort, like as you said, over like a long period of time, do you take that time and effort to teach yourself that discipline that you need to score really high on this exam? Or adversely, you could probably try to hire someone who has that discipline who can teach it to you, really.
Yeah, 100%. Sorry, Waleed. We'll get to you really shortly. Spoiler alert: Waleed did not use tutoring. He's going to go into his own strategy as well. But I'm just going to wrap up this tutoring topic right now. So there are other cheaper alternatives to tutoring. You don't need to go to like Mathesium, whatever center you have around you. There are college students that teach you because they're broke college students. They just want money. So you can try those guys out too. They have taken the exam as well, and probably most like recently and like a couple years ago they took it. So they have those tips and tricks that you would want, but their teaching may be a bit weird, but it is cheaper. I can tell you that for a fact.
Yeah, so talking about tutoring and everything. So honestly, I didn't use tutoring, but I think the situation's circumstantial. So I'll get into that in a little bit. But so the resources that I used was a website called No Red Ink. I definitely used Khan Academy. I took all those practice tests. I made sure that if you go down the list, you get rated 1 through 4. I made sure there was a 4 proficiency on everything. Try to go through most of the things every day for a summer. And I also use something or Prep Scholar. So Prep Scholar like had some list. I'll make sure this is linked in the description. But so there's a list of like the 25 most core concepts that you need to know for the SAT, for the math section, and then like all the essential grammar rules that you need for the SAT grammar section as well. So I use that list. I also use YouTube videos to teach myself. Organic chemistry tutor comes in clutch for math. And so those are the kind of the resources I used. I also used a book. It wasn't like books from like other companies. I just used the College Board book. I believe it's like $15. So I took that book. They have all the tests printed in there. So I just took all those tests on the multiple sheet paper. And yeah, so I took all those tests. I read through the whole book. And the SAT also has an app. I think it's like SAT daily practice question. I made sure I always did those. And if I got it wrong, I would go over the question. In the test, I'd also go over what I got wrong, what I wasn't too confident in. And so talking about tutoring, I honestly think it's circumstantial because personally, I excelled in math a lot in school. I took Algebra 1 in 8th grade, Algebra 2 in 10th grade, Geometry 9th grade. And then another class I think is very important for the SAT is statistics. It kind of just helps you a lot with the formatting or the structure of a math question. So I recommend taking those classes. If you know that you're falling behind in certain math classes, for example, you're in 11th grade and you've just taken like geometry, for example, then I definitely recommend getting a tutor because you're a little behind. So then in that situation, a tutor can definitely help you. And then if we're talking reading and writing, just make sure that you're half decent at English class, and you can definitely learn all the grammar rules by yourself. The reading section is a little difficult, but if you just do multiple of them, like the ones on Khan Academy, you should be all right. So those are the resources that I use for the SAT, and that's my recommendation on whether or not you should get a tutor.
Waleed, are we gonna have to make the title of the video how to free to play the SAT? But moving on, what are some long-term studying tips that you'd recommend to people for the SAT? Because this is not a short race. You cannot bang out studying for the SAT in 2 weeks. That is some absurd stuff right there. So guys, give some recommendations to the viewers that are, looking for some long-term tips to study for the SAT.
So go ahead, Mustafa. Were you going to say something?
Oh, I was just going to say, in terms of like timeline, like you should definitely start planning to take the SAT like a few months in advance, like at least 3 months, in my opinion. The best case scenario that you can do is you give yourself a long time to study and you do amazing the first time you take the exam and you never have to worry about it again. That is evidently not what happened to me, even though I planned a lot, because I have terrible test anxiety, so don't do that. But I would recommend that you like plan for at least like 3 months. Like if you're being very serious about this and if you want to get a very good score, whatever that may be for you, like you need to put in a lot of work for this and you need to be very disciplined. And I would recommend you make a schedule that's spanning all 3 months that you have. You should have something for every day that you do, for every week. I would recommend you take a practice exam very frequently, at least at the bare minimum, like once every 2 weeks. I personally took a practice exam like once every week for 3 months straight. So that way I could like firmly track my progress every single week. So that way I would know exactly what I have to work on. And then in those times that you're not taking the practice exam, so like the rest of the days of the week, definitely practice on the specific things you need to improve. So that way the next time you take the practice exam, you can do well. And what I did personally was I used a book from ACT, like ACT.com had a book, and I used 2 different books. One of the books had a bunch of practice exams and that was it. Another book had a lot of like drill questions for every single section and that was it. And so between those 2 books, I made a plan that I'm going to do, 50 questions from each section or something every day and take the practice exam and see what I need to do. And then if you run out of practice exams, because that's what ended up happening to me, you can always revisit them and erase all your answers from the first one and do that, because it'll have been a while since you took it. So it'll be like a new exam for you basically. But I would definitely recommend a few months, try to make it so that way you can bang it out the first time you take it and you don't have to worry about it ever again.
Yeah, and I would definitely say that taking it the first time and scoring really high on it, that is absolutely ideal. I was going for that. I got my score. It wasn't bad, but I was still like, this just really isn't enough for me personally to be like even considered a little competitive. My first exam, I think I was like 13 something. It wasn't high 13 something. It was like low 13 something. And that just, I didn't feel like that was enough for me. But the strategy I mostly used was, as Mustafa said, like it's great on practice exams, nonstop practice exams. Take one every week, every 2 weeks. Personally, I took about 2 every 3 weeks or so. I was busy with other things, as life gets. But practice exams are definitely important because it just helps you monitor your progress. And again, like I can't stress this enough, you get a feel for the College Board's questions, right? That's very important to me. I've found a lot of success on AP exams just by knowing like generally what the question wants me to do, you know. And practice exam drill questions are very important. I bought this $20 book. I think this was like my main study guide that I used. There was this $20 Barron's like SAT guide or whatever, and it had a bunch of drill questions, a bunch of practice exams, things like that. And I would say that that definitely helped me in the long run, especially for math. I don't know why I did like pretty bad on the math section my first time around. The second time around, I really pulled through, but yeah, it really helped me in math.
Yeah, I think I got the title of the video now. We're gonna have like expensive SAT and then cheap SAT, and then we're gonna compare them. I think that's the best. I'll add my 2 cents to this as well. Long-term studying tips, I would, make a schedule. I would say every day. I wouldn't say like, oh, every other day, because then you're gonna start getting lazy. Just do it every day, for a good chunk of time, and just do the sections that you want to do. Maybe like English one day, math the other day, English one day, math the other day, and then just do it that way. Get a study partner, but do not study with them when you're studying like the actual material. Maybe like practice exam, take it with your friend, and then after that compare your results. And then you got one question wrong, your friend got like the question right, and then they'll go, oh yeah, you didn't do this, and you'll get the instant answer that you want.
So when talking about long-term and short-term studying tips, for the long term, I definitely recommend at least 3 months. Personally, June 2019 was my first SAT exam. So I believe I scored a 1260 on that exam. And then I planned on taking the exam once again at the end of August, and I brought my score up to a 1410. So the way I did that was, honestly, I just kind of picked which subject I was way better at. For me, it was personally math. And I made sure that I knew everything about math. The math section, I knew how many questions there were, what kind of questions were going to show up, things like that. And you got to make sure that you know how to solve certain questions, because there's always the same questions always show up. It's just like different wording. So always make sure that you know the format and the kind of questions that show up. So that's for the long term. I definitely recommend using test weekly. So on Khan Academy, you'll see there's 10 practice tests. You should take those once a week. Personally, I took them on Mondays at 8 a.m. In order to simulate kind of the timing of the test, because the test is in the morning. So it's always important that you get your brain thinking early in the morning. Besides that, I think it's important that you don't panic study. If you take the last 2 weeks and you're just panicking and you're trying to study everything, you're going to burn yourself out really quickly. And by the time you take the test, you won't be able to improve your score by that much.
Moving on to our next point. Do you have any exam taking tips for the viewers? Obviously, in our last video, the study tips video, we do go over some exam taking tips there. I think it's around minute 21 to 26 and onward. You can watch that video. We go over other exam tips, but we'll give you some specifically for the SAT as well. Specifically for me, when taking the exam, before the exam, get that full sleep in. Obviously, like Waleed said, get used to that time. Eat a breakfast. If people are not fans of breakfast, get used to it, because you're going to need food running through your brain. And bring a snack, bring some water as well, because you're going to need it. After that, when taking the exam, time manage yourself. When you're thinking about the question, you go and kind of look at the clock and going, oh, shoot, I'm taking way too much time on this. And then just circle it, or maybe you just randomly guess and move on, right? And there are methods of like, oh, always have that lucky number. Try to narrow it down, and then use like a not lucky number, letter. Try and narrow it down to 2 letters and then guess from there. I would not say like, oh, read the sentence, go, I don't know, and then just circle C, because that's stupid. Obviously, look at the past answers as well. Sometimes the past answers give you hints to the actual answers. So yeah.
Yeah, I would definitely recommend that. Like if you're gonna take a standardized exam for realsies, and if you're gonna be serious about this, like you're gonna study for a few months. So morning of the exam, don't stress yourself out whatsoever. I would even recommend that the night before the exam, after like 7 p.m. or something, like stop doing everything and just like stop worrying about work whatsoever and just go do something fun. Because at this point, realistically speaking, you're not going to improve whatsoever. You're not going to help yourself by cramming at the last minute. You're not going to help yourself by worrying about it the morning of. It's not going to do you any good. There's no point at this point. You should be very confident and just trust in whatever abilities and whatever skills that you've gotten at this point. Even if it's not necessarily how much you would have wanted to prepare, be confident in how much you have prepared and go in with that mindset, because you can always take it another time, because you should be planning out for the future. Like standardized exam shouldn't be something that you're doing at the very last minute. Of course, make sure you wake up on time, set an alarm, eat breakfast like Danial said. I personally hated breakfast. I had to get used to it. Get to the place on time, all of that good stuff. Something that I found was very helpful when I was like physically taking the exam was I would like know how many questions I was on that one section and how much time was given for that one section, because the ACT is a lot faster than the SAT, but it's easier questions, but there's a lot more of them. So it's much more like speed focused. So I knew exactly how much time I had to spend on every single question. Like math, I had to do 2 seconds a question, whatever it was. English, I had to do 10 seconds a question. So I would definitely recommend that. And I'm pretty sure you can keep a watch with you, like a wristwatch. Definitely get a watch that you can have on your desk that has the seconds digitally on it. You don't want a watch that has like the analog hands. You want a digital watch on your desk. That way you can monitor exactly where you are, what you are. If you're taking way too much time on a question, don't worry about it. Just mark an answer and move on. Tick mark it, and if you have time at the end of the section, come back to it and review it and see if it looks right. But definitely time management is a big thing, and that's something that you'll really get the feel for if you do a lot of practice exams.
Yeah, I agree with both of you here. Time management, very important. Breakfast, extremely important. Cannot stress this enough. Even if you're not a breakfast person, get a snack in the morning or something, because if you're feeling hungry during the exam, that's what's going to be on your mind instead of what you've been studying for, what you've been preparing for all this time. Normally, I'd like to play a little bit of devil's advocate during exams. You should be a little stressed. That's fine. A little stress is okay. It's going to end up motivating you more rather than hurting you. The confidence should be there. You have been studying for this, as Mustafa said. Even like the night before, you shouldn't really be doing anything. All right, you should be trying to take the edge off, get a good night's sleep and all of that. During the exam, pacing is very important. I wouldn't recommend this for everyone, but what I like to do is I like to fly through an exam, right? Everything that I do know that I'm 100% confident of the answer, I want to put that down, and then whatever I don't feel that confident about, I will skip that question completely. I know this doesn't work good for everyone, because if you forget that answer, you're pretty much screwed if you don't circle anything. But I like to just go through an exam. If I feel myself that I have that pace, that I can finish the exam with a lot of time remaining to answer those questions that I've left blank, then I will do this, because I want to save like all the thinking I need to do for the last couple of seconds. If I can dedicate more time into those questions that I'm not sure of, then I'll do that. But if I just don't need to waste time on easy questions that I've already gotten through, then I won't. I will just fly through an entire exam and then do the questions that I missed. But I know that strategy is not really for everyone. It's just what I do.
So for the exam, what I recommend is that try not to worry too much about the time. If you've been studying a lot, you should be able to like mentally track yourself at what time you're at. For example, if you're in the reading section on the SAT and you've finished about 2 articles, personally, that would take me about 20 minutes out of the 60. So then you should be able to track yourself like that. And then always make sure that you leave time for the end, especially in the math sections. I believe there's written questions there. So try to leave a little extra time so that you can do those questions. I believe they're valued more as well. So for example, if the math no calculator section is 20 minutes, I would try to leave at least 5 minutes to do the last 4 or 5 written questions. During the exam, I know the reading section gets kind of boring on the SAT. So what I try to do is I try to force interest in the subject that's being discussed. I don't know how I do it, but I just try to act like I'm interested in the subject. And that usually helps me in kind of remembering after one pass through the reading section. For the math section, I just recommend knowing the equations. And if you really don't know how to do a problem, I would just start writing like numbers down. Write down the equation that you have. Try the quadratic formula. I feel like the quadratic formula works a lot on the SAT. And just keep on writing for the math section. So those are my recommendations for the test.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
definitely agree with you there on trying to fake interest in a subject, especially in some of these reading pieces. I don't remember when or where it was. It might have been an SAT, PSAT, or maybe it was like an AP Lang exam that I took that was talking about like chairs, like the psychological importance of chairs. Please, someone tell me they remember this. But it was just such a boring topic, but I just tried to force myself to get interested in it. And I think in the end, I actually ended up doing pretty good on that passage just because I was making those connections in my mind. Because if you're interested in something, your mind will naturally try to be curious in it. And you can fill in those gaps of information from the multiple choice questions a lot better. Just like I think another one of my important like test taking tips is just you want to go into a test with a clean slate. Like nothing has to be going on in here. Like you can't be worrying about like, oh, do I remember the quadratic equation? Do I know how to do this polynomial thing, or do I know how to do this grammar thing? Just if you have studied and if you have built upon that foundation of knowledge, you should be able to access it during the SAT.
Was an AP Lang test. I remember that passage. The entire school was talking about it.
Oh
It
my
was
God, it
talking
was
about
so
like
funny.
chairs and hammocks, and if you stand up from a chair, you're in a higher position of power. I remember that.
I don't even
Moving
know.
on to our next topic. How many times should you take the form of the exam, and which type of exam should you take, the ACT or the SAT? Personally, I think for the ACT, for the SAT topic, I've taken both. I've taken a practice version of that one. The ACT, I've taken the practice version of the SAT. ACT, it's a bit easier questions. Like some of the math was like third grade questions, and I was astonished. And then some of the English were easy as well. The passages I felt like were easier to get interested in, but obviously it's a longer race on the ACT. And if you have good exam stamina, take the ACT. I feel like it's a better fit for you. And if you're more science and math inclined, take the ACT. It may be better fit for you. And then for the SAT, I personally liked it more because it was short. It was a shorter exam. Maybe the questions were slightly difficult, but I just felt more inclined to the SAT. And you'll understand it when you take both of them. Don't look at the number, right? Oh, I got like a 19 on the ACT, but then I got like a 1100 on the SAT. That's great. You may have done worse in the ACT, but try to focus on which you slightly enjoyed more as well. But obviously, if you're more inclined to the SAT, take the SAT.
Right, and I never took the ACT like for real. I took a few practice exams here and there, and I just feel like I would do a lot better on the SAT. And I want to say all but one of the schools that I applied to, and that one was like my bottom choice, had any like requirement for an ACT score. Whereas I feel like, especially in here, like in the Eastern United States, like I feel the SAT weighs in a lot more. So I just ended up taking the SAT instead.
Yeah, so I'm not originally from the East Coast. Like I haven't lived here for a very long time, so I'm not sure if there is a regional difference. Like I grew up in California for most of my life, but from what I understand, the main difference between the SAT and the ACT is that the SAT is less questions, but they're harder questions, but you have more time. The ACT is more questions, but they're easier, but you have less time. So the ACT, you have to be a lot faster in what you're doing, and the SAT, you have to think a lot more, basically. And me being the bozo I am, I took the SAT a couple times, and I got like a decent score, But then I tried the ACT and I did much better that time. So then I really focused in on the ACT. So I would definitely recommend if you're like trying to figure out which exam you should take a practice exam for each, the SAT and the ACT, and see how you do. And then there's a lot of like online score conversion. So I would definitely check to see which one you did better. Like Danial said, you might do better on one exam than another, but I would definitely also check to see which one you feel a lot more comfortable with. Because if you did a lot worse on the SAT, but you think that you can really get the hang of the questions because they're a lot more like, in your type of realm, then definitely focus on the SAT if you feel like that. Of course, if you do better on one exam and you feel like you can do better on that same exam, then take that exam. Of course, there's nothing wrong with that. As far as how many times you should take the exam, what I would recommend is, because most college applications start around the fall of your senior year, you should definitely start taking your standardized exams and give your first standardized exam in your winter break of your junior year. And there's a few reasons why I say this, because number one, you're planning for the worst case scenario, that maybe you don't do as well as you did on that first time. It's okay. Now you have your spring semester of junior year to study for a few more months, and you can take it again, maybe in your spring break or your summer break of your junior year. If you do amazingly well first time around in your winter break of junior year, okay, great. You don't have to worry about it now. But you don't want to be caught in a situation where the first time you take the standardized exam is, like the summer before applications start, and you don't do as well as you did, and now you're scrambling to try to review everything and find another exam date, and applications are starting and you're not sure what to do. Like, you don't want to be caught in that scenario. So I would definitely recommend you start like plenty in advance, so that way you can give yourself enough time in case you don't do as well as you want to.
So talking about ACT versus SAT, personally, I think that you should kind of find out the colleges near you and which colleges, because usually a person attends the colleges closest to their home. Or personally, that's what I did. So find out what colleges you kind of want to attend and which one they prioritize, so the SAT or the ACT. So in the Northeast, I know that the SAT is more prioritized, so I recommend taking the SAT. And I think it's important that you focus on one test. You shouldn't be taking the SAT and the ACT, because if you do that, then you're kind of overworking yourself, and then you're going to have to learn how to do 2 exams, and it's going to become more difficult for you. So kind of find out which one you feel more comfortable with, as Mustafa was saying, and just focus on that one exam. And this kind of picking of the exam should be done before your studying period, in my recommendation. So as I said, 3 months for studying long term, and you should pick between the ACT and the SAT before that time. How many times you should take the exam? I think that the SAT shouldn't be taken more than 3 times. That gives you enough time to super score for your SAT exam. I'm not too sure about the ACT, but it's got to be around the same number. Personally, because for example, say someone scored a 1450 in their second attempt, and someone scored a 1450 in their 5th attempt, colleges are going to prioritize the person that scored it in their second attempt, because by the 5th attempt, you've had so much practice, it's kind of expected that you get a good score at that point. So I recommend taking standardized tests the least amount of times as possible, 3 or 4 being the cap.
I would say, yeah, about 3 or 4 times is the cap. And it's not even the case of like, okay, you're tiring yourself out by, doing all this practice and prep and things like that for this exam. I would not recommend anything above 3 times unless you're trying to get like a very, very perfect score. Or on the flip side, you have a lot of money. All right, because let's face it, like, what is it to take the SATs? Is it like $93 or something like that, 100 maybe? That's a decent amount of money for an exam, and that you're not going to be improving on much after 3, or maybe even after 2. I think after 2 you might see like for the SATs at least, you might see like a 10 point up, maybe up to 30 point improvement. I wouldn't recommend just wasting $90 something just on that. And again, SATs are decently important in our society, and with the way standardized testing and everything works. But you have to remember that colleges don't just look at your SAT scores. In fact, my school did like this event with Siena College, actually, where someone came in. I don't even remember who it was at that point. It's so long ago, like during my junior year, and they challenged us to rank, to like value as a college admissions person would, how important certain things are. So like we had teacher letter recommendations, college letter recommendations, extracurricular activities, and things like that. And SAT scores or ACT scores were surprisingly like pretty low on the spectrum of things that they genuinely look at. Like, again, these are pretty important, but I see the general trend is that SAT scores are slightly being shifted out in terms of importance. What colleges more want from you, and I think this is why the SATs were designed in the first place, is to measure your aptitude in a college-like setting. But the SAT isn't a perfect test of that by any metric. So I would even say don't focus too much beyond 3 attempts on getting the perfect or like most competitive SAT score. Balance out your life in high school. You know, join a club, do extracurricular activities. I think focus on your grades. Like, that is probably way more important than trying to get 10 points extra on an SAT.
Yeah, and I 100% agree with you guys. I do need to wrap this up. We are getting a bit above our usual time, and I apologize for that, but I feel like it's a very important topic. So I'm going to go over with one last question. Do you guys have any finally encouraging words for people that are taking the SAT and ACT? I'll go first. You know, obviously, don't give up the first time. It's not going to always work out the first time. You know, I would say 10% of students get what they want the first time. You know what I mean? So keep at it, at least 3 exams. And if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen with the score that you want. It's not the end of the world. Obviously, just, you know, try to find an alternative.
I would definitely say that, 3 times is how much you should take it. Personally, for me, I got a 32 the first time, a 32 the second time, and the third time I got my 35. So hang in there. Like, you'll be able to do it. It's a difficult road. It's very hard. It's very tough, but it's very worthwhile in the end. And I know there's a lot of stress about doing well on the exam, whether it's from yourself, from family, friends, teachers, whatever it might be. But you can do it. You can do it. Don't worry. And at the end of the day, colleges don't always be like, oh, you didn't score this, that's it, you're not here. Too bad. That's not how it works. Colleges look at a lot of other different things. So hang in there, and you guys can do it.
Yeah, same thing, rounding off basically what Mustafa said. You know, you're doing this for you. You're doing this to better yourself, to improve basically your life, your college experience, whatever. Don't let it get to you too much. In the end of the day, the SAT is, again, just another test. You're going to have many, many more of those down the road, and just keep at it, persevere. Don't give up on yourself, and just know where your limits are, basically.
So my advice for standardized testing is that it's honestly never too late to study, even if it's only 2 weeks or a week before your exam. If you do some committed studying, make sure you're not panic studying, but if you do some committed studying, you should be able to see some form of point increase. So I recommend, you know, even if it's a short time ahead of your exam, to try to get at least some studying in. Also, like everyone was saying, the SAT, the ACT, it's just another exam. It's not too prioritized. Well, it's pretty important, but it's not too essential to your college application. They still look at other factors. So just make sure that you're a well-diversified student, and that you're involved in the community, you've done good in school, and things like that.
All right, I guess that concludes our video for today. Thank you for all you guys joining me out of your busy schedules. I do greatly appreciate it. Also, for the viewers, please like, comment, and subscribe on our channel. If you have any questions about taking the SAT, please comment. And yeah, thanks.